Hi there. Alfred Stieglitz is one of those old guys that you know was important in some ways. You might be able to even point to a few of his pictures. But was he more than just a socially well-placed photographer who ran a famous gallery? Let's just say that without him, photography would have been lost in the wilderness for a very long time. For 100 years, from 1890 to 1990, the direction of photography has been steered by three powerful figures who dedicated their lives to the medium: Alfred Stieglitz, Edward Steichen, and John Szarkowski. All three of these men had their detractors, and they've been accused of arrogance and manipulation, but one can't argue about their commitment to photography. Stieglitz was a maverick who seemed to be consistently out of step with the world around him, or maybe he was just a step or two ahead. This legendary figure was complex, difficult, and full of contradictions. He was described as the gentlest and kindest of men, but also as autocratic and brutally critical. Stieglitz was born in New Jersey into a family that made their fortune in the clothing industry. He was sent to Berlin to study mechanical engineering, but fell in love with photography. He became obsessed first about mastering the elements of the medium, and then proving that he could do things with the camera that everyone said were impossible. In Europe, he was having a wonderfully free time, experimenting with his new art and with life. But when his favorite sister died in 1890, he had to return to New York. He was 26 and didn't at all feel ready to settle down, but he was receiving a lot of pressure from his family. So he tried his best to become a businessman, and also then married Emmeline Obermeer, the daughter of a successful brewer. He failed at both the business and at marriage. The two of them didn't have much in common. She had social climbing ambitions and had no interest in the art world. He was determined to prove that photography should be considered to be a fine art, capable of artistically expressing in the same way as painting or sculpture, and creating an avant-garde vision that broke with the conformity of the past. Stieglitz was accustomed to getting his way, and within the US photography scene, he quickly became the leader of the fine art movement. He became editor of Camera Notes, the publication of the Camera Club of New York. This prestigious position gave him the power to advance the photographers and the policies that he preferred. But by 1902, the general membership considered him to be elitist, forcing him to resign. This didn't actually worry him much because he was ready to move on and had already planned for his new organization and journal. In his words, he wanted to break away from what he described as commercial trash and artless amateur photography.
The problem for serious photographers at about the turn of the century was that basic photography had become so easy that there was no longer any distinction in being a photographer. So that a new system had to be designed that would separate the sheep from the goats.
Stieglitz and a few other like-minded photographers formed the Photo-Secession, which focused on the craftsmanship involved in photography. Stieglitz edited the association's upmarket publication called Camera Work from 1903 to 1917. His younger friend and artist Edward Steichen donated studio space that became known as 291 or Gallery 291. That was the building number on Fifth Avenue in New York. Stieglitz continued to focus his efforts on photography at the expense of his family. Emmeline still hoped she would one day win Stieglitz's love and continued giving him an allowance from her inheritance. Initially, pictorialism was the chosen path to imitate art techniques. They did things like putting Vaseline on their lenses, scratching the negatives, or painting chemicals on their prints to simulate brushstrokes. The aim was to make photography a handmade process like the other arts. So pictorialism helped to elevate photography to the fine art status by suggesting that it wasn't just a machine-made process. It required human intervention. Then around 2010-2015, the world entered a stage of revolutionary advancement. Cubism, psychoanalysis, Einstein's theory of relativity, jazz, everything was changing. Within the art world, there was a broad movement towards modernism. Artists wanted to express the reality of the world without embellishing their works. Photography just couldn't continue producing flowery pseudo-paintings. During this time, Paul Strand brought a portfolio of prints to Gallery 291. Strand understood the camera's unique ability to capture shapes and forms directly and in sharp focus. Even the name he gave to his process, straight photography, implies that there's no need for embellishing. Stieglitz, as usual, instantly recognized that he was looking at the new direction for photography. He said, "Young man, you have created a new and great modern art." This became the photographic aesthetic of the 20th century. Pictorialism and straight photography were now obviously in opposition. Many of the pictorialist photographers weren't happy about the transition. You could imagine photographers who had spent decades perfecting their techniques to create textured, arty photographs were now being told, "Hey, sorry, we're going for this new, slick, pared-down feel." So the photography world needed a visionary like Stieglitz, who was in touch with the broader art world's transformations in order to modify the creative space. He was prepared to be unpopular in order to steer the photography ship in a new direction. A photograph that Stieglitz had made in 1907 demonstrates how his own creative ideas had for some time been shifting away from pictorialism and towards a more modernistic approach. During a family trip to Europe, his wife insisted that they travel first class on a large fashionable ship. Stieglitz felt trapped by the polite Nouveau Riche company and escaped to the back of the ship. There he came across a scene that was filled with interesting shapes and also said so much about the class structure of society. He immediately rushed back to his cabin, collected his camera, and captured this frame, which he called the Steerage. It's essentially a study of abstract shapes, but at the same time hints at broader social issues. Stieglitz said that even if all his other photographs were lost, and his work was represented by just this one photograph, he'd be satisfied. It became a turning point for his own work. Stieglitz wasn't content with just directing the progress of photography in the USA. He used Gallery 291 in a broader way to drag the USA into the modern era. He wanted US artists to see what was happening in the European art scene. He began showing European modernist painters, and some of the critics were not very impressed. He was determined to show that the paintings of Matisse and Picasso had the ability to be expressive. After his Picasso show, only 2 of the 83 works were sold. Stieglitz bought this work called Standing Nude. One critic described it as a picture of a stairwell, and not a very good one. Stieglitz offered the remaining 81 works to the Met for $2,000, but they turned down the offer. Because Stieglitz and his Gallery 291 were playing in the big league, His efforts at promoting photography as an art form were taken seriously. If he was just a photographer pushing the medium from the sidelines of the art world, he would never have been able to achieve the inroads that he did. In 1916, he was introduced to the drawings of Georgia O'Keeffe. He described what he saw as being a woman on paper and set about preparing an exhibition of her work. He didn't get around to telling O'Keeffe about the show.
He was having a show at the Stieglitz Gallery downtown at 291, and I knew right away that that was mine. But as soon as I heard he was having the show and he hadn't said anything to me about it, I went down to make a fuss about it.
They initially started communicating via letters, but then Stieglitz offered her a quiet studio in New York. He started taking nude pictures of her, which led to his wife seeking a divorce. O'Keeffe became his muse, inspiring over 350 photographs, many of them focusing on her hands and her face. His approach to photographing her was consistent with his modernist ideas. He didn't think it was possible to encapsulate her personality into a single image. Rather, he was building a collection of images that reflected the fragmented sense of self brought about by the rapid pace of modern life. He also saw portraiture as a partial representation of the subject, as well as an expression of the photographer's feelings for the subject. I'll run a few more of these portraits, but thanks for staying with me, and I'll see you next time.
And it didn't make much sense to me because I'd had all the scandal. It was much more of a scandal then than it is. Wouldn't be any scandal at all today. But at that time it was quite a scandal. Well, it bothered me. I got over being bothered. There wasn't anything I was going to do about it. So what? I always say I've had everything said about me that they could say except that I've died.